Welcome to the Last Witness Files. We upload more interesting videos daily. Please subscribe if this story resonates with you. I've been the elected sheriff of a rural county for 12 years. When I say rural, I mean it in the old-fashioned way: one main highway, 2 stoplights, and enough empty land that you can drive 30 minutes without seeing a porch light. Our station is a squat brick building set back from the road with a gravel lot and a flag that frays a little more each year. Nights are quiet. Paperwork, radios murmuring, the sound of the coffee pot. Real life moves slowly here, until it doesn't. The first time the call came in, I was out on patrol near the western farms. It was close to midnight. The snow had crusted hard over the fields, and the sky had that hollow winter sound where you swear you can hear distance. Dispatch said a resident had called to report suspicious movement at the sheriff's office. That alone was odd. People don't watch the station. There's nothing to see. I headed back in, tires ticking on frozen gravel. The building sat the way it always does, a single row of dim windows, the porch light bleaching the front steps. I went inside expecting, I don't know, a broken window, maybe. But it was empty. Just the heater humming and the smell of old coffee. I did a full walkthrough. Squad room. Holding cell. Evidence closet. Everything locked. Everything still. In the morning, I asked dispatch to replay the tape. A woman said she'd seen movement inside after hours. She'd watched the windows and thought someone was walking through the offices with a flashlight. Her voice wasn't hysterical, just careful, certain of what she'd seen. I filed it under odd but explainable. Reflections, maybe. The snow throws light in strange ways. That's what I told myself. The second time, a week later, I was at my desk. It was after 10. The deputies had gone home. Our night coverage rotates with the highway patrol, and that night wasn't ours. The phone rang. Not my direct line, the front desk number. It shouldn't ring when no one's manning it. But it did, that steady, ordinary bell. I picked up out of habit. No one answered. Just the sound of a line opened somewhere else, air moving through a wire. I said my name. I asked who was calling. There was a sound, not a voice, like somebody adjusting the receiver against fabric. Then the line went dead. I walked out to the front counter, expecting to catch someone coming in, maybe a late report or a lost traveler. The lobby was empty. The glass reflected me and the exit sign behind me and nothing else. I checked the call log the next day. The system showed an internal extension. The call had originated from the station, from the same number I'd just answered. That bothered me enough that I had the phone company run diagnostics. They said our line was healthy. No shorts. No phantom loops. Everything checked. You tell yourself there's an explanation because there has to be. Machines don't get ideas. Buildings don't develop habits. The third time is when I stopped being comfortable. It was early February. Snow drifted up the side of the building like piled laundry. I'd driven back from a welfare check that turned out to be nothing, an elderly man who'd fallen asleep with the TV on too loud. I came in, hung my coat, sat down. The phone started ringing in the interview room. I knew that sound immediately. The old wall phone in there has a higher pitch, like it's ringing inside a tin can. But no one had been in that room all day. We keep the door closed. Lights off. I opened the door. The light was still off. The phone rang again in the dark. I switched the light on. The chair, the table, the recorder, all sitting where they should. The phone was ringing with its little metal tremor. I picked it up. Silence. Then the faintest impression of breathing. Not panicked. Not heavy. Just present. Like someone standing too close. I said, "You've reached the sheriff's office." "Who's calling?" The breathing clipped off. A click. Dead air. I looked at the clock in the hall. Midnight straight. Then I checked the log. The call, once again, showed as internal. I started staying later after that. Partly because the paperwork demanded it. Mostly because I didn't like the idea of the building having a life of its own when I wasn't there. Nights gained a texture. You notice things you never notice in daylight. The timing of the furnace, the way the fluorescent lights hum in slightly different keys, the soft pop of old wood shifting in the walls. None of it is threatening on its own. It's the accumulation that works on you. The sense that a place is not just a container but an organism with habits and moods. I didn't tell my deputies. You don't pass along your private unease. Leadership means you filter it. You let people sleep. But I started keeping a small notebook in my top drawer. Dates. Times. 11:42 p.m. Lobby phone rang. Line open. No voice. 12 a.m. Interview room phone. 3 rings. Static. Patterns matter in this job. And after a while, a pattern began to form. The calls clustered around midnight. They rarely went beyond 3 rings. The line always traced back to us. Then we got the first outside complaint that tied directly to our number. A trucker called in from the outer highway. He said he'd received a call while driving. Our caller ID appeared on his dash display, but when he answered, no one spoke. He thought it might be a welfare check request. He called back. The line rang into our main desk. I took the call myself, confused. He sounded embarrassed. I sounded professional. We both pretended it was nothing. But after I hung up, the station felt different. As though I had acknowledged something I'd been quietly avoiding, that the building wasn't just reacting. It was reaching. I began to worry about documentation. About what it would look like if I logged this officially. The chain of command is less forgiving than people think. Unexplained phone activity doesn't read well in a report. So I kept my notes private and told myself that someday it would stop on its own. Most things do. It didn't. I started locking my own office door at night. That isn't standard practice. There's no reason to. The station is already secure. But it gave me the illusion of one more layer between me and whatever had decided to use our phones as a kind of corridor. I didn't think of it that way then. Not exactly. But I knew it felt wrong. And in my line of work, when something feels wrong for long enough, you respect the feeling, even if you can't justify it on paper. The real shift began when the calls stopped. For nearly 2 weeks, the station was uneventful. Not quiet, we're never truly quiet, but ordinary. Bar fights, domestic disputes, one snow-related rollover out by the river bend. Nothing out of place. Midnight came and went without a ring. My notebook stayed closed in my drawer. I tried not to feel relieved in a superstitious way, but I did. It's funny how quickly you begin to measure safety by the absence of something you can't explain. Then one Friday night in late February, dispatch pinged me while I was finishing reports. The heater clicked on. A fluorescent bulb flickered in the hall. I remember those details because they anchor me to reality when I think about what followed. "Sheriff," dispatch said, "we've had 4 missed calls in the last hour from the station line. All to the same number." The resident called back upset. Says no one spoke. I told her I'd look into it, because what else do you say? I hung up. Then I checked the outgoing log. She was right. For calls placed from our main desk line to a farmhouse 23 miles east. All while I was sitting at my desk. I walked out to the front counter. The phone sat in its cradle like it always does. If there had been snow on it, it would have looked untouched. But the system showed those calls plain as day, time-stamped, clean. I phoned the resident myself. A woman in her 60s. She sounded embarrassed and irritated at the same time, which is a common combination out here. I apologized, told her it was likely a routing error. She paused, then said something that stayed with me. "Well, Sheriff, the strange part is, I didn't answer the first 3. I let them ring. But the last one, when I finally picked up, there was breathing. Like someone listening." She laughed it off. I didn't. After I hung up, I stood in the lobby and listened. To the HVAC. To the ticking clock. To the space. I realized then that I no longer thought of the calls as an issue with the line. Somewhere along the way, the station itself had become the subject. The caller. The thing with intention. I didn't like that realization, but I couldn't unsee it. The next morning, I came in early and pulled the phone server. I know enough to be dangerous with electronics. I photographed the connections, logged serial numbers, spoke to the telecom tech over the phone for nearly an hour. He ran remote diagnostics. Everything came back clean. He asked if anyone might be making prank calls. I thought about my staff. I thought about the tone of those empty calls. I said no. He suggested a factory reset. I thanked him and said I'd consider it. Then I set the handset down very gently, like I was afraid I'd wake something. That weekend, a deputy I trust, level-headed, 6 years on, stopped by my office and closed the door. He said he didn't want to sound crazy. I told him to go ahead anyway. He said quietly that the night before, while finishing reports, he'd heard voices in the squad room. Not conversation. Not words. Just the rhythm of human speech. As if someone were talking down the hall with the door slightly ajar. He checked the rooms. He was alone in the building. I watched his face while he told me. He wasn't performing. He wasn't seeking attention. He just needed to put the burden somewhere else for a minute. I thanked him for telling me. I told him buildings make noises. Sound carries strangely in old ducks. I said every line except the one I believed. That night, I stayed late again. Snow drifted down like sifted flour. Midnight passed. Nothing. I almost went home. Then the front desk phone rang. I answered on the first ring. A man's voice said, in a calm, unhurried tone, "Sheriff office." Not sheriff's office. Not the way we say it around here. The wording was off, like a copy of a copy missing a letter. But the cadence, my cadence, was unmistakable. It was the way I answer my line. Slow. Professional. A slight downward turn at the end. I opened my mouth, but the voice had already finished the sentence, as though it had only been programmed to deliver that one line. Then silence. Then the click of a handset replaced. I looked down at the caller ID. It was us. Our own number. Calling ourselves. I stayed very still for a long time. I don't remember breathing. I remember the clock hand moving, because I watched it to prove to myself that time still worked. When I finally checked the log, my hand shook once and then stopped. Training is a gift that way. The log showed precisely what I expected. Outgoing call, Sheriff Main Desk, Sheriff Main Desk. Duration, 0:04. There is no function on our system to permit that. Lines can't loop into themselves like that. You'd need an external trunk or a spoofed number. But there it was, printed coldly like any other call. That's when the missing time started. It began subtly enough that I doubted my memory first. I'd sit down to write a report and look up to find an hour gone without any sense of what I'd done with it. Not zoning out. Not fatigue. Just a cut. A clean seam across my awareness. One moment, I'd be halfway through a paragraph. The next, the cursor would be blinking 4 lines down in a sentence I didn't remember finishing. I checked the camera footage in the squad room to rule out the obvious. Footage showed me sitting there the entire time. No one approaching. No event to mark the gap. Just me. present, absent, present again. I told myself I was tired. And then, one night, the radio chirped with my own voice. Not live. Not an echo. A recording, only we don't record that channel. The voice, my voice, said the words I'd just spoken to dispatch 10 seconds earlier, but with a faint hiss under it, like it had traveled a long distance through old tape. Dispatch didn't react. She simply acknowledged my initial call, which meant she hadn't heard the echo. Only I had. I didn't mention it. I began to feel as though the building wasn't keeping time with the rest of the world, as though it had its own clock, slightly misaligned. And sometimes, when the two clocks came close enough, things overlapped. Calls doubled. Voices repeated. Moments rewound. Or maybe that's just how a tired mind defends itself from the feeling that reality has seams. I wish I could say there was a single decisive event that forced me to confront it. But like most real horrors, it didn't announce itself. It accumulated. Until the night the station called a dead man. The dead man's name was Harold Mason. Everyone called him Hal. He'd lived alone on a property outside town, a sagging farmhouse, one barn, a line of skeletal trees marking the back of his land like ribs. He'd passed in early January. Natural causes. I'd been the one to notify the county coroner. I'd stood in his living room and smelled dust and old wood and the faint, lingering scent of pipe tobacco that seems to outlive the person who smoked it. We'd logged everything properly. Time of discovery. Estimated time of death. Effects sealed. Case closed. So when dispatch told me the station had placed 2 calls to his number in the same minute, I didn't correct her. I just said I'd look into it. The log made it real. Outgoing call, Sheriff Main Desk, Mason, Harold. Duration, 0:01. Outgoing call, Sheriff Main Desk, Mason, Harold. Duration, 0:01. Both at 12:03 a.m. Both answered, technically. The system only registers a duration when the call connects. But no one at the station had made those calls. Certainly not to a disconnected line in an empty house belonging to a man buried 6 weeks prior. I called the telecom provider again. I asked more direct questions this time, about spoofing, trunk loops, phantom bridges. The tech on the other end was patient and thorough, and entirely certain this could not happen without manual input. I told him I appreciated his time. I didn't tell him I was starting to mistrust the idea that the world ran on rules at all. That night, after the deputies went home, I went into the interview room. I shut the door. I sat in the metal chair with my hands folded and listened. I don't know what I expected. A sound. A voice. Proof that my fear had an object. Instead, I got the same thing I always got. The heavy, layered silence of a building at rest. It should have calmed me. It didn't. Because by then I understood the silence wasn't empty. It was full of potential. At 12:03 a.m., the lobby phone rang twice and stopped. I didn't move. Then the interview room phone rang. I picked it up before the first ring finished. There was a click. Then a man breathing. That same measured, unhurried breathing. You can tell a lot from breathing. Age, health, emotional state. This sounded like someone accustomed to being unremarkable. I said my name. The breathing paused, not in surprise, but the way you pause when turning a page. Then the line went dead. I put the handset back like it might break if I moved too quickly. You learn, over time, how to carry dread without outward signs. You stand up straight. You keep your face neutral. You do not grip the edge of a desk until your knuckles pale. That's what I did when I left the room that night. I walked the halls, checked doors, flicked lights on and off with deliberate slowness. I pretended the world was intact. Because the alternative, that the world had cracks you could fall through without moving an inch, was more than I was prepared to entertain. The next change wasn't the phones. It was the people. A deputy mentioned casually, that he'd seen me leave the station around 10 the night before. He'd waved from his cruiser. Said I didn't notice him. The problem was, I never left. I'd been in my office until after 1 in the morning, finishing a backlog of reports. I remembered it clearly, the scratch of my pen, the soft rattle of sleet against the windows. I checked the security cams again. At 10:04 p.m., the external camera recorded me. Or someone wearing my coat, moving with my gait, walking down the front steps and out into the lot. The figure didn't look at the camera. Didn't look anywhere, really. Just walked with a kind of steady purpose toward the far end of the gravel before slipping out of frame into darkness. Inside, the hallway camera showed me at my desk at the same time. 2 times. 2 versions. 1 seated. 1 leaving. I watched the split-screen feed like a man watching his own autopsy. Clinical. Detached. Aware of something vital being revealed, too slowly to stop. I didn't report the discrepancy. I didn't pull the hard drives. I didn't call state tech. I closed the monitor window and sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the building breathe. Because by then, the building breathed. It inhaled in the dead spaces between phone rings. Exhaled in the way the heaters cycled. It was subtle, but once you noticed, you couldn't unhear it, like a second pulse in the same body. Out of step. Neighboring yours. That same week, we had a false 911 call from a payphone. No voice. Just the call. When dispatch traced it, the address pinged back to our station. But the timestamp on the 911 system lagged the station's log by 18 seconds. Time, I realized, no longer agreed with itself here. The first time I lost a block of memory during a call-out, I nearly resigned. It was a simple welfare check. Elderly resident. No answer to the door. I knocked, announced, circled the house. Everything secure. I radioed dispatch, told them I'd try the back door. Then, nothing. Then I was back at my cruiser, engine idling, headlights painting the snow. 10 minutes gone. I checked the resident again. He was fine, asleep in his chair with the TV on. No harm done. But harm isn't always measured in outcomes. Sometimes it's measured in the quiet space where your memory should be. I began writing times on my hand. Not notes. Just the minute. 10:14, 11:02, 12 o'clock. Proof that I'd been somewhere, then. That I'd been anchored. It didn't help. Because eventually the numbers changed. Once, only once, I looked down and the ink on my skin didn't match the clock. My hand said 11:48. The clock said 12:03. I listened to the building then, the way you listen to a dark room when you're a child, not for noise, but for intention. That was the night I heard the second voice on the line. The lobby phone rang at 12:03. As always, I answered. My own voice said, in that slightly off cadence, "Sheriff office." And then, layered beneath it, delayed by a fraction of a second like a shadow catching up to the body, another voice, faint, flattened, as though recorded on old tape. "Sheriff office." 2 versions. Same words. Same tone. Slightly misaligned. Like the world clearing its throat. I listened until the line clicked off. I didn't sleep after that. I sat at my desk with the lamp on low and the station dark around me and thought about all the small ways reality signals its strain. How we look past most of them because the alternative, that reality is fragile, would paralyze us. The next day, the maintenance man came in to look at a heater unit. He's been with the county longer than I have. Quiet man. Steady. He paused in the lobby and said, almost to himself, "Feels different in here lately." I didn't ask what he meant, because I already knew. A few days later, the building placed another call, this time to my house. My wife didn't answer. She was sleeping. The call log on our phone recorded it all the same. 12:03 a.m. Sheriff main desk home. Duration, 0:03. That, more than anything, tipped something inside me. Professional distance only stretches so far. When the thing that doesn't follow rules starts tracing the outline of your private life, the boundary dissolves. I sat in the station lobby at 12:02 the following night, watching the clock, the handset inches from my hand. The building was as still as a photograph. At exactly 12:03, the phone rang once, twice, then stopped, and the radio crackled with my voice saying my own name. But I hadn't keyed the mic. I didn't move for a very long time. You start to understand, after enough years in this job, that control is mostly an illusion we cooperate with. We wear the uniform. We organize facts into reports. We stack meaning neatly into boxes so we can keep walking forward. When those boxes start coming apart, you don't panic. You don't even acknowledge it out loud. You just move slower. You check the locks twice. You answer the phone a little more carefully, as if the voice on the other end might not be entirely committed to staying where it belongs. The next development looked normal. A wrong head count. It happened during briefing. 3 deputies. Myself. That makes 4. I've counted heads in rooms for half my adult life. Trainings, evacuations, warrant teams. It's automatic. But that morning, when I glanced up from the clipboard, I counted 5. 5 shapes. 5 people. Then I blinked, and it was 4 again. Nothing dramatic. No vanishing act. Just an instant in which the world revised itself and decided not to tell me why. No one else noticed. I dismissed the briefing and walked back to my office at a measured pace, aware of my heart climbing a rung higher than it needed to. I shut the door. I stood there until the feeling passed. Later that day, I checked the interior camera feed. Not because I expected to find anything, but because checking is another way of stacking meaning into boxes. On the recording, there were 4 of us. And a fraction of a frame, just a few corrupted pixels, barely there, where the count became wrong. Not a person. More like the shape of an intention. Then gone. You begin to accept that either the world is fraying or you are. The trick is to function anyway. The next incident wasn't subtle. A man walked into the station one afternoon asking to speak with me. Mid-40s. Normal coat. Normal tone. He said he was responding to a voicemail I'd left him earlier about a citation issue. I hadn't called him. He recited the message back from memory. "This is the sheriff office. Please return the call." Same incorrect phrasing. Same cadence. He said he'd recognized my voice, which is something that happens in small counties. People know you. You become part of the scenery. I told him, calmly, because that's the job, that there must have been a mistake. We reviewed the system. No outgoing call to his number. Nothing on the line records. Nothing on the backup. Clean. He left satisfied. I did not. That night, I played the conversation over in my head until the words began to detach from meaning and become sounds. The wrong phrasing circled me like a quiet insect you can't quite swat. Sheriff office. Singular. Imperfect. As if something had learned our language from a slightly flawed transcript. I started doing small tests after hours. Talking out loud in empty rooms. Not dramatic. Just phrases we use 100 times a week. "This is the sheriff's office. Can you repeat the address? What is your emergency?" I'd pause between each one and listen to the way the building held the words. Not echoing. Not mocking. Just remembering. One night, I said my full name. I waited. Nothing. I turned off the light in the lobby and stood in the dark with the phone resting in its cradle and thought about how a place might learn a person. The missing time escalated in both directions. Sometimes I'd lose 10 minutes. Sometimes seconds would stretch into something longer, like watching syrup fall from a spoon. A single ring of the phone felt like it lasted the length of a breath you couldn't finish. I considered a medical explanation. Stress. Sleep. Age. I went to my doctor. I didn't mention phones or doubled voices. I said I was tired and couldn't concentrate. He took blood, told me to rest more, suggested time off. Time off doesn't exist in places like this. If the sheriff is gone, the job doesn't stop. It simply waits for you to sit back down. The night the station called itself again, I was ready. I set a recorder beside the handset. Not official equipment, just a little digital thing people use for lectures. I pressed record at 11:55 and waited. The room felt like a mouth holding breath. At 12:03, the phone rang. I answered. "Sheriff office," my voice said, wrong phrasing, wrong grammar, uttered with perfect confidence. I didn't speak. The line carried a faint hiss, like ocean heard from far away. Then the second voice, the lagging shadow version, repeated it. Then a third. Not louder. Not different. Just another layer arriving late to join the space already filled. 3 of me. One after another. Like the station was flipping through different moments and letting them overlap. I kept the line open until it clicked empty. Then I stopped the recorder and played it back with hands that did not shake, because training is a discipline you practice for exactly these moments. The device had captured only my breathing. No voices. No rings. No hiss. Just me. The absence of proof isn't reassuring. It's a deeper kind of confirmation that whatever is happening has rules you don't understand yet. The next day, I asked dispatch to pull all overnight recordings. She did. Clean. Normal. We both pretended that meant something good. That evening, snow hammered the county so hard the world shrank to the beam of a single headlight at a time. I stayed at the station because it felt safer to sit in the center of the thing than to leave and wonder what was happening without me there. At 11:40 p.m., the radio keyed. My call sign. My voice. I said, from nowhere. En route to station. Com. Routine. The problem was, I was already at the station, sitting at my desk, watching the radio with the slow dread you feel when something familiar acts wrong. Dispatch acknowledged. Then, 30 seconds later, I spoke again. 10:23. On scene. I wasn't on scene. I hadn't moved. But the radio log accepted the transmission as valid. As though there were 2 of me, one arriving, one already arrived, and the system had simply allowed both realities to log themselves. I went to the front door and opened it. Snow swallowed the porch light. The world was a wall of white and the crunch of winter against itself. I stepped out far enough that the building loomed at my back and the lot stretched ahead like a frozen field. The headlights of a patrol car bloomed out of the storm like a memory deciding to appear. The vehicle rolled into the lot at a measured pace, tires hushed under snow. It parked in the far corner, engine idling, lights on low. I raised my flashlight and walked toward it. The driver's seat was empty. Key in the ignition. Engine running. Radio crackling. My call sign hanging faintly in the static, like a word spoken into a jar and sealed. I reached in and shut the car off. The silence after the engine died felt absolute. The storm made no sound. The world reset. I checked the unit number. It was mine. I checked the log. It showed me en route. On scene. And now, absent. I took the keys inside. I set them on my desk. I listened to the building. I knew then that whatever was happening wasn't random. It wasn't chaotic. It was structured. Repetitive. Like a system trying, and failing, to synchronize with itself. And I was inside it. That realization changes the quality of silence. It becomes attentive. You begin to feel watched not by eyes, but by time. I didn't tell anyone about the duplicate patrol car. Not because I was trying to conceal it, but because I didn't have the language to make it sound sane. You can describe evidence. You can list facts. But what do you call an event that leaves no residue except the certainty that something occurred when no record says it did? The next morning, the lot showed only one set of tire tracks. Mine. The cold does that. Edits the world into neat, legible lines, and for a few seconds I stood there looking at the snow like it was a witness I could cross-examine. But snow doesn't argue. It just sits there and insists. I began to notice how people spoke about time in the building. Small, casual remarks. A deputy would say, "Feels later than it is." Dispatch would glance at the clock and frown like it had betrayed her. We were all experiencing time as something slightly slippery, and none of us were acknowledging it. That unspoken agreement, to ignore the wrongness, might have been the strangest part. The next complaint came from a nearby town. A resident said the sheriff's office had called him twice overnight and hung up. Same story as before. No voice. Open air. A faint sound like someone thinking near the receiver. The twist was that both calls had been logged as missed on our system. According to our records, the phone never left the cradle. That day, I stared at the server rack for longer than I needed to. It hummed steadily, a small artificial heart keeping the skeleton of the building alive. I wanted to blame it. I wanted a burnt card, a miswired panel, a blinking red light. Something with screws. Something you could hand to a technician and say, "Here. This is the problem." Machines, at least, obey their failures. Near midnight, I walked the station again. The same path as always. Squad room, locker room, interview room, evidence, back exit. The route had become ritual. I wasn't checking for intruders anymore. I was checking that walls were still where they had been yesterday. The interview room clock read 11:58. The squad room clock read 11:53. The hallway clock read 11:56. None of them were synchronized. They'd never been perfectly aligned, of course, but now the differences felt intentional, like the building had adopted 3 separate opinions about what moment we were in. I corrected them, one by one. Standard time. Second hand lined at 12. Then I walked the loop again. They'd drifted. Not far. A minute here. 30 seconds there. If I hadn't been hyper-attuned, I might have missed it entirely. But once you see the seam, you can't unsee it. At 12:03, the lobby phone rang. Only once. Just a test, like a pulse taken quietly in the night. The radio keyed. Silence. A single breath, mine, or someone who'd practiced sounding like me. Then the carrier dropped. I sat down in the lobby chair and felt the weight of the building settle around me like water. That was when the wrong head counts began repeating. Briefing. 4 people. I'd count 5. Then correct myself. A call-out. 2 deputies. I'd see 3 silhouettes stepping through the threshold. Then one would resolve into nobody. No one else reported it. Which left 2 options. Either it was me, or it was the world, and neither answer was comfortable. I started journaling in more detail. Not official notes, just a running ledger of perception. Time. Sound. Head counts. Phrases on the line. The wrong grammar, sheriff office, appeared with a regularity that felt almost mathematical. On the 15th entry, I stopped writing. Because, in my own handwriting, a line had appeared I didn't remember setting down. 12:03, lobby line expects answer. Not rings. Not calls. Expects. The word worked under my ribs like a small, cold knife. I checked the previous page. Checked the pen. Held the paper up to the light like it might confess. There is a special kind of dread reserved for finding your own voice in places you don't remember leaving it. That night, the building was still as a closed eye. No radio chirps. No traffic on the highway outside. Even the furnace seemed to pause, listening with me. At 12:03, the phone didn't ring. Instead, the back door alarm registered a brief open-close. No sound accompanied it. I walked the hallway slowly. The exit was secure. The bar latched. Snow unbroken outside. The panel, however, had logged it. 12 hours 3 minutes and 2 seconds. Door open. 12 hours 3 minutes and 3 seconds. Door closed. 1 second. Just enough time for a shape to step through. I disabled the beeper so it wouldn't chirp at me, then leaned my forehead against the cool glass of the door and looked out at the blank world. There was nothing there. Or rather, there was too much nothing, the kind that feels like it has depth and direction. The kind that can hold a presence without showing it. I thought about all the procedures and reports that make up this job. All the forms. All the ways we attach meaning to events. And I wondered what you'd even call it if a building decided to behave like a person. The next day, a state auditor arrived for a routine check. Completely unrelated. Coincidental. His presence returned the world to something like normal. He wore a good coat and a faint smell of cigarettes. We walked him through the station and he complimented our organization. He asked to pull a few random call logs. The printer whirred out the records. He studied them, brows knitting slightly. Bit of duplication here, he said lightly. See. Same timestamp. 2 entries. I took the pages from him. There it was. 12 hours and 3 minutes, incoming. 12 hours and 3 minutes, incoming. 2 calls. Same second. 2 different internal extensions. Both listed as source, Sheriff Main Desk. He shrugged it off. Probably a software quirk. I nodded. Because that's the only answer people are equipped to give. But the auditor left, and the building relaxed back into its private shape, and I felt the quiet acknowledgement of something that did not care whether we had a name for it. Late that evening, a deputy radioed that he was bringing in a drifter, intoxicated but non-violent, to sleep it off in holding. Standard procedure. I prepped the cell. Paperwork. Breathalyzer. Routine. The man came in with the defeated slump of someone used to being processed. He avoided eye contact. He smelled of winter and unwashed clothes. As I secured his property in a plastic bin, he looked past me toward the desk and asked, very softly, "When did you add the other one?" I followed his gaze. There was nothing there. Other what? I said. He frowned, confused by my confusion. The other sheriff, he said. The quiet one. He said it like he was commenting on the weather. Not dramatic. Not frightened. Matter of fact. I didn't respond. I didn't correct him. I finished the booking, placed him in the cell, and returned to the lobby. The chair across from the desk was empty. I sat down in my own chair and folded my hands and looked at the reflection in the glass of the front door. Just me. A familiar silhouette. And for one unbroken second, no more, that silhouette didn't quite match the way my body was sitting. It lagged. Like the echo of a movement I hadn't made yet. That was when I understood the calls weren't the main event. They were just the surface disturbance, the top layer of something happening beneath the routines and schedules and policies we call reality. Something was rehearsing us, practicing, and the building had become the stage. The word rehearsing stuck with me, not because I believed it in any rational sense, but because it felt correct in a way logic couldn't quite dismiss. The wrong phrasing, the layered voices, the duplicate logs, the sense of events sliding slightly out of sync and then rejoining as if nothing had happened. It was like listening to 2 orchestras playing the same score half a beat apart, and only noticing when the overlap began to scrape against your nerves. I started sitting in the lobby deliberately at midnight. Not out of courage. Out of obligation. If something was going to continue using this place as a conduit, then the least I could do was be present for it. There's an instinct in law enforcement, whether you say it or not, that if you stand still long enough in the center of a situation, the truth will eventually circle you. I don't know if that's wisdom or superstition. The first night I tried it, the chair across from me remained empty. The second night, the phone rang once at 12:03, then stopped. The third night was different. The third night, the radio keyed my call sign without sound. Just the hiss of open air. No voice. No message. Dispatch didn't acknowledge, which meant, by the record, it hadn't happened. But it had. I keyed my mic, Unit 1, I said quietly. Radio check. Dispatch came back normal, copy clear. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't been checking in with her. Not really. I'd been checking in with the building. Around that same time, I began to notice duplications elsewhere. Small details. A file I could have sworn I'd already signed reappearing in my inbox unsigned. A report with yesterday's date, printed twice. I'd correct them, refile them, and return the next day to find the correction undone. Administrative ghosts, we sometimes call those errors. But this felt less like haunting and more like echo. Like the paperwork was living through multiple drafts of the same day and leaving artifacts behind. The drifter in the cell slept quietly that night, which I was grateful for. When I checked on him before dawn, he looked at me with that strangely lucid calm some intoxicated people reach on the downslope of their high. "You shouldn't sit alone in here," he said. I asked him why. "Because the other one doesn't like to be watched." I didn't press him. You learn not to when you don't want the answer. By March, snow had turned to slush and then to hard, gray ice that lined the shoulders of the highway like a second, receding road. Our calls picked up. Domestic disputes shake loose in the thaw. People drink differently when winter breaks. I was grateful for work that had texture and shape, things you could put your hands on. Interventions. Statements. Arrests. The world behaved. It made sense. But every night, when the station emptied, that sense of order leaked away. It was around then that I started seeing myself in places I hadn't been. Not on cameras, though the cameras had shown enough already, but in the way people spoke to me. "You just stopped in," the diner owner said one afternoon. "Didn't think you'd be back this soon." I hadn't been in the diner in 2 days. "You were quiet," she added, almost apologetically, as though that explained everything. The same week, a local farmer asked me if the station was running night patrols now. I said yes, on rotation with the highway. He nodded and said he'd seen my cruiser idling down the road around midnight on 3 separate nights. Engine off. Lights off. Parked like it belonged to the darkness instead of the road. When I asked him which deputy he'd seen, he hesitated and said, "Looked like you." He said it kindly, without speculation. That's the thing about small places. People don't leap to supernatural conclusions. They fold the bizarre into daily life the way you fold laundry, efficiently, without ceremony. I drove that stretch of road at midnight the next night. No cruiser. No engine ticking cold beside the ditch. Just darkness and the way it presses against glass when the world is otherwise asleep. Back at the station, the clocks had drifted again. At 12:03, the phone rang twice. I answered. This time, there was no wrong phrasing. No sheriff office. No layered voices. Just me. It was my voice. Perfectly accurate. The exact timbre and cadence I use when speaking to frightened people. Calm. Professional. "I need help," I said. My heart didn't race. My expression didn't change. But something inside me went still. "What's your location?" I asked, because protocol fills the space where panic might go. The line clicked dead. The log registered the call as internal. Source: Sheriff Main Desk. Destination: Sheriff Main Desk. I listened to the building the way you listen to the ocean in a shell. Not for waves, but for suggestion. I checked my notebook. I had written a sentence I didn't remember writing. "I need help, 12:03. I stared at the page until the handwriting, my handwriting, stopped looking like letters and became marks left by some other animal. You would think fear would sharpen you, make you vigilant. But the truth is, prolonged dread dulls the edges. It makes you methodical, slow, careful in the way you place each thought. Like stepping on rocks across a river. The next occurrence came from outside the county. A neighboring jurisdiction forwarded a complaint. The sheriff's office, our sheriff's office, had called their emergency line twice in one night and hung up. No caller ID. Just our number. When they dialed back, they reached our lobby voicemail greeting. My voice, recorded years earlier, welcoming them with the steadiness of a person who believed his building stood in the same reality as everything else. We compared logs. Their incoming calls and our outgoing calls didn't agree on the time. They were off by exactly 18 seconds. The same lag from the earlier 911 trace. 18 seconds. A beat. A breath. A shadow catching up. I wrote the number down in my notebook and circled it 3 times. That night, I sat at my desk with the lamp off, letting my eyes adjust to the ambient glow of the exit sign and the faint blue wash from the snow outside. The building became a shape more felt than seen. I didn't check the clock. When the phone rang once, I lifted the handset to my ear but didn't speak. 3 breaths. Then my voice, calm, certain, slightly softened by distance, said a single word. Sheriff. No title. No office. Just me, addressed from somewhere just out of reach. The line went dead. I sat there with the receiver pressed to my ear a few seconds longer than necessary, aware of how absurd it looked, and how utterly reasonable it felt. Later, when I replaced the handset, the dial tone held, just a half-second, longer than it should have. Like reluctance. The building had begun to feel reluctant. As though it did not fully want to let go of any connection once made. I slept in the office that night. Not because I had to, but because going home felt like crossing a border I wasn't sure I could re-enter. In the morning, the world resumed. The radio crackled with weather advisories. Deputies joked in the hallway. Coffee tasted like coffee. The day wore its familiar face. But every clock in the building now read a slightly different minute. And no one but me seemed to notice. That was the day I realized the station hadn't only been calling out. It had started calling in. Calling in is different than calling out. Calling out implies intent, direction, a signal sent into the world to be answered or ignored. Calling in is quieter. It suggests that the source isn't reaching toward anything external at all. It's folding inward. Echo-locating itself. The realization came from a detail so small it would have been easy to miss. A pattern in the timestamps. The duplication wasn't random. It clustered around internal extensions no one used after hours. Lines meant for interoffice transfers. Voicemail access. Administrative trunks that rarely saw daylight. The building had begun to route itself through itself, like a nervous system burrowing deeper into its own pathways. I didn't have language for that, so I didn't write it down. Instead, I began marking where I was physically at 12:03 every night. In the lobby. In the hall. In the interview room. I wanted to see if my location made any difference. If the building would change its behavior based on proximity, like an animal gauging threat. The first night, I stood outside on the front steps. The world felt fragile. Snow had melted into slick glass patches along the gravel. The flag hung limp. The road lay empty in both directions, a thin idea of civilization stretched across the dark. I watched my breath slip into the air and disappear like it had never been part of me at all. At 12:03, the phone rang inside. I let it. 3 rings. Silence. The building held the moment like a closing fist. The second night, I sat in the interview room. The light felt too bright. The table too solid. The chair too intentionally designed for containment. I rested my palms on the cool metal and waited. At 12:03, the hallway fluorescent flickered once. Then the line outside the room rang. I stood, but I didn't answer. The ringing stopped. The room felt suddenly smaller. The third night, I locked myself in my office. Not because I believed the lock would matter. Belief had very little currency left at that point, but because it was a gesture. A line drawn in a place that no longer cared much about lines. At 12:03, nothing happened. Absolutely nothing. The absence of disturbance felt so deliberate, I nearly unlocked the door again just to break the spell. But I stayed very still and thought, for the first time, that perhaps it wasn't me the building was using. Perhaps it was only rehearsing proximity. That week, a deputy reported that her radio had begun repeating her transmissions a half-second later, faintly, as if someone were relaying her words back from the edge of reception. She chalked it up to interference. So did I, out loud. Internally, I added it to the pattern. We received another complaint from a resident who'd gotten a late-night call in which no one spoke, except, faintly, in the background, they'd heard what sounded like our lobby heater cycling on. I knew that sound. I'd lived with it. The station had gifted it to them like a tiny, unnecessary proof that the call came from a real place. I tried resetting the entire phone system on a Sunday afternoon when the building was empty. Unplugged everything. Let the heart stop beating for a few minutes. Plugged it back in. Watched the lights come up in sequence like a small city waking from a brief and unremarkable sleep. That night at 12:03, the phone didn't ring. The next night, it rang once. The night after that, it rang 3 times, then bled into the sound of the radio keying, not quite simultaneously, but close enough that I couldn't be sure where one ended and the other began. I realized then that I had crossed a line without noticing. It wasn't the phenomena that frightened me anymore. It was the consistency. A system that malfunctions does so irregularly, chaotically. This felt almost polite. Scheduled. A quiet insistence that reality had developed a seam and now, every night, something was testing the strength of the thread. One afternoon, the county judge dropped by to sign paperwork. He's a practical man. Education. Years on the bench. A deep believer in the steady march of causality. His presence should have anchored the building back into the shared world the rest of us inhabit. While he was waiting at the counter, the lobby phone rang. He looked at it. I looked at it. I answered. No one spoke. I apologized for the glitch. He nodded, shrugged, signed the forms. But before he left, he said, "You ever get the feeling this place remembers too much?" He meant the job. The weight of old cases. The ghosts of bad days that never fully leave. But the phrasing lodged deep. Remembers too much. Memory again. A line bending. The missing time worsened. It wasn't whole blocks anymore. It was smaller things. Reaching for a pen that had already been placed in my hand. Standing up because I believed I needed to walk somewhere, then realizing I was already there. Words appearing in my notebook in the exact rhythm of my thoughts, as if the act of writing had lost its delay. The drifter was released. No charges. No harm done. He shook my hand on the way out and looked around the lobby one last time with a searching expression, like someone leaving a childhood home they can't quite remember loving. That night, alone again, I sat in the dark. I didn't watch the clock. I didn't hold the phone. I just breathed. And at 12:03, without stimulus, without any visible change in the world around me, an unmistakable certainty settled into my mind. The phone is ringing. I didn't hear it. I knew it. As if another version of me, in a neighboring draft of the same moment, had lifted the handset and the knowledge had bled across the seam. I don't expect that to make sense. It doesn't make sense to me either. I stood up, walked to the desk, placed my hand on the receiver, and hesitated, because in that instant, I felt watched, not by eyes, not by cameras, not even by the building, but by the shape of the moment itself. As if time had leaned in close, curious to see what I would do. I answered. The line was already open. No ring. No click. Just a shared silence, like stepping into a room where a conversation had been happening long before you arrived. Then my voice, closer now, not delayed, not layered, said quietly, "I'm here." Not to me. Through me. And I realized, with a clarity that didn't frighten me nearly as much as it should have, that the call wasn't about location. It was about confirmation, presence, attendance, roll call across realities. I didn't speak. The line stayed open a fraction longer than physics would prefer. Then released. When I checked the log, it showed nothing. No incoming. No outgoing. No evidence. Just the blank square where time lives on paper. I sat back down and folded my hands. The building felt satisfied. Not peaceful. Not resolved. Just satisfied. And that was somehow worse. Because satisfaction implies progress. And I no longer believed this was rehearsal. I believed the performance had begun. Progress toward what was the question I avoided asking. The one that sat quietly at the edge of all the others. Police work teaches you to focus on what you can verify. Time, place, statements, outcomes. But the building had stopped giving me those things in a straight line. Instead, it offered fragments. A voice here. A double timestamp there. Small shifts in head counts and clocks. All of it accumulating into a shape I could sense but not quite articulate. I stopped trying to solve it. I started trying to witness it. That is a different posture entirely. It was around then that the institutional denial began. Not in a malicious sense, just the way organizations protect themselves. The county IT contractor came out one afternoon to run diagnostics. He was young, efficient, good with cables. He checked our server, our routers, our logs. He frowned at a few irregularities, then concluded everything was operating within acceptable tolerances. He printed a clean bill of health and clipped it neatly to a folder. Machines, again, obey their failures. We shook hands, and the building waited for him to leave before exhaling back into its true shape. That same evening, a deputy called in a traffic stop. Routine. His voice was steady. There was the sound of wind, the muted thrum of passing tires. I listened without conscious effort, the way you always do, ready to step in if something went sideways. Then his voice reported the plate number again. Identical cadence. Identical background noise. But he hadn't keyed his mic. Dispatch paused. I paused. He continued with a stop as if nothing had happened, unaware that a copy of his voice had preceded him by a beat. When I mentioned it to him later, he looked at me with a furrowed brow and said simply, "Didn't say it twice, Sheriff." He wasn't defensive. Just sure. I logged it privately and let the official version of the day go on record as uneventful. The next change was spatial. I noticed doors not quite aligning with the rooms they led to, not physically, but perceptually. I would walk from the hallway into the squad room and feel, for half a second, as though the room had been placed there freshly, copied from itself, like a set being wheeled into position just before an actor walks on stage. Nothing had moved. It felt rehearsed. That word again. One night, at 12:03, the building chose a different channel. My cell phone vibrated on the desk. Unknown number. I answered without thinking, because habit is stronger than fear, and lifted it to my ear. No ring. Just open air. Then my own voice, not distant, not delayed, but intimate, as if spoken from across a small room, said quietly, "Stay still." It wasn't a command. It was a suggestion. A calm, procedural one, like an officer instructing a witness. And there was something gentle in it, something that recognized me. Then the line cut. I stared at the screen. No call registered. No digital footprint. My phone lay there like a tool that had never been used for anything unusual in its life. I didn't record that, either. Not officially. Because at some point, evidence stops being a comfort and becomes a liability. You realize the truth you're dealing with is not built to survive contact with paperwork. The next complaint came from a hospital 2 counties over. Their overnight supervisor called to say someone identifying themselves as the sheriff office had rung the ER desk at 12:03 a.m., said nothing, and hung up. Caller ID traced back to us. She wasn't upset. More curious than anything. I told her we must have had a system error. She accepted that easily. People want explanations that let them go back to work. After we hung up, I sat with the receiver in my hand and thought about lines of communication stretching out across counties. Wires, towers, fibers, all of it carrying signals we usually trust without question. And I imagined some small misalignment traveling along those lines like a ripple, arriving slightly off-tempo wherever it touched. 18 seconds late. Half a breath early. A voice arriving where it was not supposed to be. A familiar voice. One afternoon, a deputy asked me if I'd called him the night before. I said no. He said he'd gotten a voicemail from the station. My recorded greeting. But then, faintly, as the message ended, another, quieter line had whispered, "I'm here." He deleted it. Not out of fear. Out of embarrassment. People don't like keeping evidence of things they can't place on a map. The day I understood that the station wasn't only calling outward or inward, but also forward and back, I was reading an old case file. Burglary. Nothing remarkable. I'd written the closing summary myself 3 years earlier. The words were as familiar as an old road. Except they weren't. Because halfway down the page, I found a sentence that did not belong there. A sentence describing an event that had not yet happened. A late-night call. Wrong phrasing. 12:03. My own name in a place where it had no reason to be. I closed the file very carefully. Set it on the desk. Opened it again. The sentence was gone. A crease remained in the page, though. The faint memory of pressure, like something had leaned on it briefly and then stepped away. I didn't mention it. The world prefers stories that stay inside their assigned lanes. That night, as I sat in the lobby, the chair across from me no longer felt empty. It wasn't that I saw another body there. I didn't. It was that my nervous system behaved as though another presence occupied that space. A subtle adjustment. The way a room changes when a second person walks in, barely detectable visually, but undeniable in atmosphere. The heater clicked on. The exit sign hummed faintly. Snow slid from the roof in a long, tired sigh. And then the phone rang. I answered. "Sheriff," my own voice said, calm and present. "Yes," I replied. We spoke in a silence that did not require words. Not because there was nothing to say, but because the call itself was the communication. Confirmation. Attendance. I understood, then, in the way you understand a procedure you've performed thousands of times, that this had become less about content and more about continuity. A check-in conducted across misaligned layers of time. A building ensuring its occupants still existed. And that horrifying idea carried, unexpectedly, a kind of sadness. Because whatever was happening did not feel hostile. It felt lonely. Lonely in the way empty corridors feel lonely after midnight. Lonely in the way a radio frequency feels lonely when no one's listening. I replaced the handset slowly. The line lingered half a second longer than physics allows. Then released. A calm washed through the building, not peace, not resolution. More like the way a system settles after performing a required task. I sat very still. And for the first time, I wondered whether I was the observer at all. Or the observed. Whether the building had selected me, not for who I am, but for my reliability. My habit of being present at the same time every night. My voice. My calm. My willingness to answer when a line opens, simply because that is what the job requires. I did not sleep. I did not go home. I watched the clocks drift like small boats in a current I could not see. And I waited for 12:03 to come back around again. It's strange how easily the extraordinary becomes routine when it refuses to resolve into a crisis. If a door slams, you react. If someone screams, you move. But if something simply continues, quietly, insistently, night after night, you adapt. You fold it into the rhythm of your life the way you fold in aches and old regrets. 12:03 became a kind of gravity. I oriented myself around it. Not because I wanted to. Because the day did. One evening, close to closing, a woman walked into the lobby with a small concern about property lines and a neighbor dispute. Routine. We filled out the preliminary form together at the counter. Halfway through, she paused, frowning slightly. "Sorry," she said. "Didn't you call me earlier?" I told her no. She nodded, accepting the contradiction without pressing it, then added, "It sounded like you." Just said sheriff. Then hung up. She wasn't frightened, just puzzled. And she said it the way people here say everything, gently, without accusation. As though reality is a delicate animal that might spook if handled too roughly. I finished the form. She thanked me. She left. The clock said 4:17 p.m. I sat behind the desk for a long while after, listening to the heater cycle and the radio chatter drift in and out. You begin to feel like the center of a web of invisible threads, each one humming faintly with a signal you can almost decode if you remain still enough. That night, I decided to break the pattern. Not by absence, I didn't have the nerve for that, but by relocation. Instead of the lobby, I took a chair into the evidence room and closed the door. The room smelled like cardboard and dust and the faint metallic memory of sealed objects. Items from old cases lined the shelves in labeled boxes. Evidence doesn't care about narrative. It simply exists, stripped of the lives it once belonged to. At 12:03, the fluorescent light hummed louder. That was all. No phone. No radio. Just that single tonal shift, like the building clearing its throat in the next room. When I returned to the lobby, the phone log showed a single missed internal ring. Destination: Sheriff Main Desk. Source: Sheriff Main Desk. Time: 12 hours and 3 minutes. I touched the handset. It was still warm, which suggested, impossibly, that someone had just used it. I didn't write that down. The next morning, I arrived early, before sunrise. The building always feels different at that hour, less like an institution and more like a body waking slowly. I walked the halls with my coffee and listened to the place remember itself. On my desk sat a printed call log. I hadn't printed it. The header bore yesterday's date. The entries stopped at noon. Nothing after. As if the afternoon and evening had not happened. I checked the system. The digital logs were intact. This printed page belonged to some half-day that existed only on paper, a version of events saved from a different draft. I folded the sheet carefully, placed it in my notebook, and tried to carry on with the business of the county. People still needed help. Cattle still got loose. Marriages still came apart in kitchens. Life, stubbornly, continued to behave like life. But the seam widened. A deputy mentioned, in a light tone, that she'd walked past my office at 8:30 the previous night and seen me inside writing reports. I'd gone home at 7:45. Another resident waved at me from their truck on Main Street around midnight. I was at the station then, listening to the building breathe. Each report on its own was harmless. People misremember. Shadows look like familiar shapes. Memory stitches gaps without asking permission. But a pattern, once seen, refuses to be unseen. Copies. Overlaps. Rehearsals. That word again. One afternoon, I pulled up archived security footage from weeks earlier. Random date. Random hour. I watched myself cross the lobby carrying a stack of folders. Ordinary. Boring. Then I scrubbed forward 10 minutes. I watched myself cross the lobby again. Same stack. Same jacket. Same small shift in my left shoulder I didn't know I had until I saw it twice. Two identical gestures separated by a stretch of time that felt suddenly less linear than advertised. I closed the feed. I didn't open it again for a long while. That evening, when the building emptied, I sat with the phone on the desk in front of me. I didn't touch it. I didn't watch the clock. But when the moment arrived, when 12:03 passed through the station like a tide, I felt it. Like pressure. Like attention. The phone didn't ring. The radio didn't key. Instead, my cell phone, which I had switched to silent, vibrated once in my pocket. I took it out. No notification. No missed call. But when I unlocked the screen, the call history showed a single entry. Sheriff Main Desk. 12:03 a.m. Duration: midnight. I set the phone down very gently. And then, without warning, I felt the unmistakable sensation of being counted. Not seen. Not heard. Counted. As if, somewhere just beyond the reach of perception, A roll call was being conducted across multiple versions of the same night, and my presence, this specific iteration of me, had just answered. I said my name out loud, quietly. The sound seemed to land on something soft, then dissipate. Days continued. Nights continued. Life narrowed to two categories. Everything before 12:03. Everything after. I noticed that my handwriting had begun to standardize across notebooks, old and new. Same pressure. Same slant. Same rhythm. As if all the different versions of my hand moving a pen across paper had finally agreed on a single method. Fair enough. It made the logs easier to read. One late afternoon, just before sunset, I stood in the parking lot drinking coffee from a paper cup and looking at the building. Nothing dramatic happened. The sky went orange. Snowmelt ran in tiny rivers toward the ditch. A truck passed on the highway with the lonely sound of something traveling from one life to another. But for the first time, I saw the station the way I imagine a stranger might. A modest brick building at the edge of a county few people think about. Ordinary in every way. And I felt a wave of affection for it, so sudden it startled me. Not sentimental. Just loyal. This building had been the container for the worst and best days of many lives. It had held grief, anger, boredom, relief. It had been the endpoint of panicked calls and the beginning of long, dull paperwork that closed loops of chaos. And now, apparently, it had become a kind of instrument. A tuning fork for reality. And I was the one tasked, unofficially, unasked, with listening to the note. That night, at 12:03, the building skipped the phone entirely. Instead, the lights dimmed, just slightly, then came back. The radio hissed once, like a sigh. And I felt a strange sense of agreement pass through the structure. Not approval. Not warning. Agreement. As though the station had verified my presence, logged it in whatever ledger it kept, and moved on to the next unseen item on its list. I slept in my chair after that. When I woke, the clocks were nearly aligned. Not perfectly. Just close enough to suggest the drift had slowed. As though something, somewhere, had made an adjustment. 18 seconds, I thought. A shadow catching up. That day, I walked through the building with a new awareness. Not of danger, but of responsibility. If the station had become a place where reality rehearsed itself, tested its continuity across versions, then the least I could do was be steady. Answer when called. Confirm existence. Report for duty. Even when I didn't know exactly whose roll call I was answering. And maybe that sounds like resignation. But to me, it felt like the job. To stand quietly inside the strange parts of the world and take notes. Not to solve them. Just to witness. That evening, as the deputies left and the building settled into its nighttime shape, I found myself speaking into the lobby air with a calm I didn't have to force. I'm here. And the silence, if silence can be said to respond, seemed to say, so noted. I used to believe stories had endings. Not tidy ones, life rarely grants those, but at least a point where the tension unwinds, facts settle into their places, and you close the report knowing what happened, even if the outcome isn't satisfying. That belief faded sometime in late spring, when the snow finally surrendered to mud and the county smelled like thawing earth and diesel. 12:03 remained. It didn't escalate. It didn't retreat. It just was, an uninvited constant that had grown so familiar it no longer felt like intrusion. It felt like schedule. The first time I forgot to dread it, I realized something inside me had aligned with the building. Not in surrender, more like acknowledgement. You don't grow afraid of traffic lights. You observe them. You obey them. You build your day around their rhythm without considering the deeper mechanics. That morning, I came in early and opened the blinds in my office. The world outside looked ordinary. Trucks, a school bus, the slow rotation of people going about their lives. The station breathed with its usual morning sounds. Kettles, keyboards, polite conversations about weather. I watched the deputies move through the building with the quiet professionalism I'd come to rely on, and I felt something close to gratitude. Because whatever the station had become at night, during the day it was still ours. Still a place built to carry burdens. Still home to work that mattered. The first sign that the system, whatever it was, had matured came from the logs. Not the phone logs. The door logs. The back exit, which had enjoyed its private 1-second opening rituals at 12:03, began to register entries at other times. 2:17 a.m. 4:01 a.m. Always a single second. Always open/close. No alarms. No sound. Just a tiny notation, as if the building were slowly learning to breathe at different intervals. The radio echoes stabilized too. Less random. More deliberate. A deputy's voice might repeat, softer, delayed, on a channel we didn't use. Never enough to disrupt operations. Just enough to confirm the pattern continued. The building was keeping time. Just not our time. I kept my part simple. I stayed. I answered. I didn't embellish. I didn't interpret. I didn't assign meaning where none had declared itself. One evening, about a month after the last snow crusted into memory, I sat in the lobby long after everyone had gone home. The chair across from me still carried that faint, inexplicable sense of occupation. Not threatening, just present. I listened to the light hum. The heater clicked. A passing truck cast moving shadows across the carpet. The phone didn't ring. The radio didn't chirp. 12:03 arrived with barely a ripple. And yet, I knew the call had happened. Not through technology. Through awareness. As though a signal had passed wordlessly through the building and checked the ledger. Sheriff. Present. Station. Stable. Time. Accounted for. Role complete. I said nothing. The building said nothing. And the silence, remarkable, settled, felt almost kind. I began to notice something else then. The wrong head counts stopped. 5 never appeared where 4 belonged. The clocks drifted less. The layers of echo folded inward until only the faintest trace remained, like a scar after a healed wound. It was as if the system, whatever its purpose, had finally synchronized. Not perfectly, but sufficiently. The incident that convinced me we had turned a corner came late in the summer. A young deputy, good instincts, steady hands, stayed late to finish an interview summary. I was in my office, door open, listening to the quiet ways buildings talk after dark. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hall. Not hurried. Not out of place. Just normal human movement. Then her voice. Sheriff? Phone. I went out. She stood at the counter, the lobby phone in hand. Her expression was calm, not frightened, not confused. Just respectful of the strangeness. No one's there, she said. But. She hesitated. I waited. But it feels like we should answer. I took the handset and held it to my ear. Silence. Not empty. Complete. Like a room exactly the right size for its occupants. I said, Sheriff. Present. Not loudly. Just enough that the word became part of the building. The line lingered half a second longer than physics prefers. Then released. She nodded, as if a procedural step had been completed. We returned to our work. Neither of us mentioned it again. I think about that often. How easily humans adapt to the impossible when it refuses spectacle. How quickly the extraordinary becomes a checkbox. Months passed. The complaints stopped. No more dead numbers. No more wrong phrasing. No more echoes seeking their source. Life continued. Court. Training. Accidents. Weddings. Retirements. The county carried on as counties do, stubbornly, with quiet resilience. And every night, not always at 12:03 anymore, but near enough, the station and I shared a brief, unspoken acknowledgement. A moment in which time seemed to glance sideways and make sure the pieces still aligned. Sometimes it was a single ring. Sometimes a soft radio hiss. Sometimes nothing at all, except the unmistakable sense of being counted. I never asked why. I never told the county commission. I never tried to define it. I simply bore witness. Because that, in the end, is most of what this badge truly means. Not control. Not certainty. Presence. Standing in the doorway of whatever life sends, answering when called, even when the call doesn't have a name. There are nights I walk the empty hallway and run my hand along the painted cinderblock, feeling the faint vibration of the building's mechanical pulse. The exit sign glows red above the door. Snow has given way to crickets. The world outside hums its ordinary tune. And I think, if reality needs places to rehearse itself, to check in, to confirm the continuity of things, then let this be one of those places. Let us bear witness to the small, invisible work of keeping the world together. Quietly. Without drama. Without proof. Just the steady practice of being here when the line opens. And when people ask me, years from now, whether anything unusual ever happened in my time as sheriff, I will likely say something calm and unremarkable. Because the truth doesn't always fit inside words. Sometimes it exists only in shared silences. In clocks that nearly agree. In phones that ring just once in the middle of the night so that the ledger of existence may mark us down as present. And in a modest brick building at the edge of a forgotten county, where a man in uniform answered a call he could not name, night after night, until the system, whatever system it was, decided the world was, for now, intact. I still sit in the lobby sometimes after everyone has gone home. I still look at the empty chair across from me and feel the faint shift that tells me I am not entirely alone in the work of being real. And when the moment comes, whether at 12:03 or some neighboring second, I say the same simple thing I have always said, with a calm that comes from long practice. I'm here. The silence accepts it. And the night continues.